What's up, Green Bay Packers fans? Welcome back. As always, thank you for joining me. My name's Paul Brettel. We're going to keep going with our draft-centric videos for the time being because it is still NFL Combine week. So what we're going to discuss today is one draft-specific question for each of the position groups on the offensive side of the ball for the Packers. But first, before we dive in, you know what to do. Hit like on the video, hit subscribe on the YouTube channel. I do greatly appreciate it. Follow me on Twitter at Paul_Brettel. Find all my work, including the article version of what we're discussing today, at ESPNlacrosse.com. And my Packers, Badgers, Brewers, Bucks fans, download the 105.5 ESPN Lacrosse app for all your Wisconsin sports radio needs. So like I said, we're going to keep our draft-centric focus going, focusing in on one draft-specific question for each of the Packers' offensive position groups. And of course, depending on what the level of need is at each of these position groups, the question that we're asking, some are a little bit stronger than others, but we're going to dive into each position group regardless to discuss perhaps a different perspective on the position groups that maybe there isn't a huge need at positionally. So let's start with the quarterback position. And so my question is, again, draft specific, will Brian Gutekunst take a late round swing in the draft on a quarterback? Now, again, from a need perspective, quarterback, certainly not at the top of the to-do list, not even anywhere near the middle of the to-do list. You have Jordan Love, who you just signed to an extension last offseason. You have Malik Willis, who is still under contract through the 2025 season. You have Sean Clifford, who is back for 2025 as well. That very well, right there, could make up the Green Bay Packers quarterback room for the 2025 season. And if you are looking to add to this room, at most, it's just going to be competition for Sean Clifford. So again, you're not spending any sort of premium draft capital on the quarterback position. That is not a surprise to anyone whatsoever. But why are we asking the question? Why would we consider Gutekunst and the Packers taking a late round swing at the quarterback position? Last offseason, Brian Gutekunst said once they had that stability, knowing that Jordan Love was going to be their quarterback for the future going forward, he said he wanted to get back to drafting and developing the quarterback position, which obviously beyond Gutekunst has been a core organizational philosophy of the Green Bay Packers, going back to, again, even Brett Favre, Aaron Rodgers' time as quarterbacks. And Gutekunst wants to get back to that approach because it is such an important position. And when it comes to when or how the Green Bay Packers are going to go about doing this, the purpose, I believe, would be to create competition for Sean Clifford, to continue pushing him, to continue churning and trying to elevate the bottom of that depth chart, of that position group. And that's something that we've seen. That wouldn't be new by any means. That's something we've seen Brian Gutekunst do really every offseason for the last handful of them now. I mean, going back to 2021, Kurt Benkert was the backup, third quarterback on the Green Bay Packers roster. The next offseason, 2022, they brought in Danny Etling to push Kurt Benkert. Etling ended up taking over. 2023, Alex Magoo came in. He ended up taking that third quarterback role. And then last season, Sean Clifford ended up moving into that role, but it wasn't without Michael Pratt coming in and competing with him for, at the time, that backup role. And the Packers ended up acquiring Malik Willis prior to the season. But so the history, the pattern of Brian Gutekunst continually churning that back end of the depth chart roster spot at the quarterback position, again, is something that the Packers have often done over the last handful of years now. So it wouldn't be uncharted waters by any means for that pattern to continue, and Brian Gutekunst wanting to find someone to push Sean Clifford, which you hope either elevates his play, helps him get to another level, or you find someone who's better prepared to handle that role, maybe has more long-term upside potential that you want to instead roster and take a swing on. In addition to that, as we look ahead to 2026, which the draft is about, right? It's about planning ahead as well. Malik Willis is a free agent. Sean Clifford's not under contract. Could the Packers, again, knowing that's a position that takes time to develop, start maybe looking ahead, planning ahead a little bit in terms of preparing for, all right, what might our quarterback 2 situation look like beyond the 2025 season, and getting a bit of a head start at the most important position in the game. And again, in bringing in that player this year to compete with Sean Clifford, you're giving them an additional runway, the 2025 season, to potentially develop into the second quarterback on this Packers roster moving forward in 2026 and beyond. You're offering competition for Sean Clifford, who maybe that would help elevate his play and maybe make him the lead option to be the number 2 behind Jordan Love in 2026 and beyond. So those are some of the reasons why Green Bay could look into that avenue. Now, the obvious challenge behind this is they have much greater needs elsewhere, right? We've established that. And they only have 7 draft picks. This isn't like the 2023, 2024 drafts where they have 10 picks, 11 picks. And at that time, you really have the luxury to, if you want to take a swing at a position that's not a huge need, you have that luxury to do so because you have so many draft picks. As of now, 7 selections in total. I think it'll be at 8 once compensatory picks are awarded. That's not an abundance by any means. You got to be very, very tactful in how you use those picks because, again, you want to make sure you're devoting them to where positions that you really need the help at. I think another factor that would stop Green Bay from going this route is we've heard Matt LaFleur say this over the summer when it's OTAs, when it's training camp. It's really difficult to get 4 quarterbacks regular reps throughout practice. Just not enough reps to go around, just not enough practice time in a given day. So again, if they go out and add a quarterback who's competing or trying to push Sean Clifford, that's 4 quarterbacks. How does that impact the summer? Is that something that the Packers want on their roster? So those are some deterrents as to why the Green Bay Packers might go down this path. And if I were to guess, I think the answer to the question is no. Will Goody take a late round swing on quarterback? I don't think so. I think in a perfect world, he would love to for all the reasons mentioned, but I don't know that it's in the cards this offseason. All right, on to the running back position. My draft-specific question for the running backs is the depth in this year's draft class way too good for Brian Gutekunst to pass up. This year's draft class at the running back position is absolutely loaded. Jordan Reed of ESPN, one of their draft analysts, he said that he has 33 running backs who have draftable grades in this year's class alone. That's like taking 2 draft classes worth of running backs and throwing them into one draft class. There is so much talent at this position group, and with that much talent, there is a variety of skill sets as well. Whatever Brian Gutekunst would want to bring into Matt LaFleur's offense, it is out there in this year's draft, and you have to wonder, because there is so much talent, is that going to be too good for the Packers to pass up? Now, on the flip side, as we look at the Packers running back room, there might be even less of a need here than what we just talked about at the quarterback position. You have Josh Jacobs. You have Marshawn Lloyd, only in year 2 of a rookie deal. Emmanuel Wilson, Chris Brooks, all going to be back for the 2025 season. That group in itself, one, that's a very strong running back room as is, but there's already a potential logjam at that position that's taking place without throwing another running back into the mix. Rostering 4 running backs, let's fast forward to August, rostering 4 running backs on your 53-man roster, that's a lot. That's just not something that we typically see the Green Bay Packers do. You're going heavy at the running back position, that means you're going light elsewhere. So there already may be a pretty stiff competition taking place this summer between Chris Brooks and Emmanuel Wilson for that 3rd running back spot. Now, if you introduce a rookie running back to that mix, you have 3 players competing for 1 roster spot. And not to say that that's a bad thing by any means, right? Competition is great. You hope that elevates the play of the entire group. But from Gutekunst's perspective, in terms of resource allocation, you already have a really, really strong running back room, right? You devoted a 3rd round pick last year to Marshawn Lloyd. You obviously paid a big contract to Josh Jacobs. Are you going to invest another draft pick into that position group when you already have some really steady options on the roster in Emmanuel Wilson, who, whenever the ball is in his hands, always seems to make defenders miss, always seems to rip off a chunk run in each game that he gets opportunities in. And then you have Chris Brooks, who just brings a really, really solid, well-rounded skill set to the Packers running back position as a ball carrier, pass catcher, blocker, the versatility to move around. Again, you have some good skill sets on that roster that you don't need to introduce. Well, it'd be great in a perfect world, right? Added competition. You don't need to introduce someone else to this room, right? So that's the give and take that comes with this running back spot. But as we look at Chris Brooks, as we look at Emmanuel Wilson, while they offer a lot, right, during this 2025 season, I don't think anyone would say that either has established himself as a long-term option on this Packers team, right? If there was someone to come along and provide a boost in either of the roles that they're asked to fill, I don't think where their position currently prohibits the Packers from exploring that option, especially as we look to the future, just 1 year from now, when both are, I believe, going to be free agents. Again, they're not long-term options, so that's a reason to potentially explore adding to this group. And once you start to get deeper into day 3 of the draft, positional need begins to take more and more of a back seat. At that point, if you're the GM, you're trying to just identify who's the best player out there, who has a trait or two that we really like that we're going to bet on, we're going to take a swing on. And again, given the depth of this running back class, there's probability-wise, I should say, that one of those players on the Packers big board, as they're on the clock in the 5th, 6th, 7th round, might be a running back. Just again, because of the pool of talent that's available in this year's class. And because of that depth, is that going to be too much to ignore? Now, again, if we're answering these questions, making our predictions, I would say that the Packers aren't going to add to this room. And I think for all the reasons mentioned, right? The talent that they have, only having 7 draft picks, talent, needs that they have elsewhere on the roster that have to be addressed are all reasons why Green Bay is not going to add to the running back position. But while it's easy to overlook this position, I believe, in terms of need, again, because of who's on the depth chart already, this draft class is loaded. And I have to think, to at least some degree, especially in that day 3 portion of the draft, Brian Gutekunst might be tempted to take a swing. All right, let's go to the wide receiver position. How aggressive are the Packers going to get with this position group in the draft? And what I mean by that, are they going to spend a 1st-round pick? Are they going to spend a 2nd-round pick on a wide receiver, a 3rd-round pick? Where, if, are they going to address this position in this year's draft? We know the big question right now. Are the Green Bay Packers going to go out and find that number 1 wide receiver? On paper, does it make sense? Absolutely. Has Brian Gutekunst even acknowledged, yeah, they need someone to step into that role. They need someone, and he's talked mostly about players already on this Packers team in the receiving room needing to elevate, in his belief that player's on the roster, and he believes there's multiple players within the Packers' current wide receiver room who can elevate and be that guy within the offense. However, by acknowledging that, he's also acknowledging that, yeah, we need someone to step into that role as well. However, filling that role, specifically this offseason, not going to come easy whatsoever. I know we're focused on the draft here, but looking at the free agency pool, and I have a whole separate article devoted to this topic over at ESPNlacrosse.com as well, but we look at the free agency pool, potentially T. Higgins, potentially Davante Adams, in terms of true number 1 top target options. That's it in free agency. As we look at this draft class, this year's wide receiver group isn't the same as we've seen in recent years from a depth perspective, from a high-end talent perspective. I just don't know that player that the Packers need in the draft specifically is out there, especially at pick 23. And so waiting until day 2 to address the position, or going back to free agency, signing a middle tier option, or even closer to a high-end option, again, just given the depth of this year's class, I don't think solves what the Packers are looking for. They do not need another number 2 option. They do not need another number 3 option. They have a wide variety of skill sets in this wide receiver room already. So who they're looking for, the type of skill set, the type of player they need, it's really, really niche. It's a really, really limited market with limited options that's available to the Packers. I do not know that it exists in the draft. And when it comes to free agency, Brian Gutekunst has to be willing, again, if he wants to go down this path, to give out a big payday and to potentially, if these players don't become free agents, have to part with draft capital as well. And especially at the receiver position, those are 2 things that we know Packers do not typically do. So I understand why much of the emphasis, the focus this offseason is on that specific skill set for the Packers at the receiver's position, especially given how last season ended with the passing game struggling and the receivers obviously playing a big role, not the only role, but a big role in those issues. However, It just really feels like the opportunity to find that player, I don't know that it exists externally outside of the organization, or at least not a lot of options, or at least not a high probability of that happening. I think the Packers are really going to have to bank on their players already on the roster, someone taking that step forward. And again, there's absolutely risk in that approach, but for the reasons mentioned, I just don't know what the alternative is. Now, having said that, I do think in play in the draft, later day 2, day 3, I could see the Packers taking a swing on a receiver, specifically because what they need is a vertical presence. They need someone to stretch the field while they are without Christian Watson. If an offense does not have that element, it makes everything so much more difficult. If defenses don't respect your ability to push the ball downfield, the safeties and everyone else starts creeping up. Those short to intermediate routes, over the middle of the field, there's less space to operate in. It becomes a lot more difficult to move the ball through the air. And there can even be a negative impact in the running game because you have more defenders closer to the line of scrimmage. So the Packers have to go out and find that skill set to add to the offense this offseason. There's guys on the roster, who have speed like a Bo Melton. We've seen, obviously, Jaden Reed, Dontavian Wicks, everyone else make plays downfield. But that specific Christian Watson-esque skill set isn't on the roster otherwise. So do the Packers look to the draft to find that presence? Because, again, it's a really, really important one to have within this offense. So I think if the Packers are going to add to the receiver position, it's going to come in that form rather than going out and finding the top target, because specifically in the draft, I just don't know if that player is going to be there for them. All right, at the tight end position, is this a sneaky need for the Packers? Is this a sneaky draft pick that we could see them make? I think the reason we can qualify it as a sneaky addition is because they have Tucker Kraft, they have Luke Musgrave, both still 2 years left on their rookie deals. They have Ben Sims back. John Fitzpatrick is a restricted free agent. I would consider him likely to return for the 2025 season. However, as we look at this tight end class, of the position groups this year, it's one of the deeper ones. The defensive front, the running back position, and tight end, I think, are three of the deeper position groups. So there's a lot of talent out there for the Packers. And I don't expect them by any means, for the reasons mentioned, who they already have, that this is going to be an early round pick. But on day 3, could I see them addressing tight end, specifically looking for an added blocking presence? I absolutely could. Reason is, one, we know that's not Luke Musgrave's bread and butter, right? He's more of a receiving threat at the position. The Packers do like what he can offer as a blocker. And when it comes to Sims and Fitzpatrick, who primarily were utilized as blocking tight ends, those are upgradable spots on the roster, right? I don't think anyone is sitting here today saying Ben Sims is 100% a roster lock. If the Packers spend a draft pick on the tight end position, someone who could push him for a roster spot, I think that's absolutely in play as the Packers look for upgrades. I know Pro Football Focus's grading system isn't the be-all, end-all by any means, but generally speaking, if a player is playing well, the grades reflect that, and if he's not playing well, the grades reflect that as well. Well, last season, Ben Sims, among 84 eligible tight ends, ranked 59th in run blocking grade, and I don't know that we have a large enough sample size of John Fitzpatrick on the field to sit here and say, we know what he is, we know what he can do. Now, obviously, hopefully, they continue to grow, they continue to develop, they improve in those areas. That's what you're hoping for. But is that something you're going to bank on? And if the right tight end is available in the draft for you, again, in a class that's deep, are you going to take a swing on it? Because one of the, after the season, I have an article on this, we talked about it on here, but one of the things we want to see more of this upcoming season is Tucker Kraft featured more in the passing game. But in part, in order to accomplish that, the Packers need a greater blocking presence outside of what Kraft brings to be able to lean on so he can go out and have some larger responsibilities as a pass catcher. And so I think that's why specifically that skill set within the tight end room, beyond Tucker Kraft, is very much upgradable for this Packers team. And again, you put that element and factor it in with the depth of the draft class, and there is a world, again, not early on, day 3, but where I could see the Packers making a pick at the tight end position. All right, lastly, round out the offensive line. My question here, not if, but how many draft picks do the Packers spend on this position group? I see the need here being twofold. I know we've discussed this before, but one, at a minimum, I think you want to add some competition for the depth of this position group on the roster, which in that playoff game against the Eagles was exposed. And like Brian Gutekunst said after the game, after the season, and I very much agree, you don't want to overreact to one performance, right? Especially when that performance is against an absolutely dominant defensive front, and you lost Elton Jenkins in that game to injury. You didn't have Jordan Morgan because he was on injured reserve already. So now you're down to your 7th offensive lineman, rookie Travis Glover, and then Kadeem Telford, asking them to come in against that Eagles front. That is a tall ask of any offensive line group to call on the 7th player in your depth chart to come in against that Philadelphia Eagles defensive front. So you certainly don't want to overreact again to that one performance and say we got to overhaul everything when it comes to the depth of this group. You hope Telford, Glover, Jacob Monk take steps forward in this offseason going into 2025. But on the flip side, banking on that, there's a risk in that, right? We don't know if that's going to happen. And so continually churning, which is something Brian Gutekunst does a very good job of, continually churning the back of the depth chart of various position groups to create competition, to raise the floor of the position group, to find someone with higher upside, higher potential that you want to take a swing on. We see him do that often. And so I think at a minimum, that's something that we see the Green Bay Packers do. Now, again, the draft's about planning ahead. And right now, this offseason, Josh Myers, starting center, is a free agent. But looking ahead, just 1 year from now, 2026, Zach Tom, Sean Ryan, Rasheed Walker, all free agents as well. 4 of the Packers' current 5 starting offensive linemen are either a free agent this offseason or next. And I think the only thing that we can say with somewhat certainty is Zach Tom is going to be back in 2026. We can't say that about any of those other 3 players that we mentioned, Ryan, Walker, and Josh Myers. So beginning to plan ahead, right? Having a plan in place. So next offseason, if you do lose one of those players or 2 of those players, whatever it might end up being, maybe they're all back, who knows? But if you lose 1 or 2 of those players, that you're not scrambling at that time, right? You have someone who's been on your roster, someone who's been in the system developing that you can rely on. Maybe they're starting this year, whatever it ends up being. But you want to get ahead of that as much as you can, especially at a position group as important as the offensive line. That's where success starts, right? The quarterback needs time in the pocket. He needs time to go through his progressions. He needs a clean pocket to throw from. The running game has to get going to keep the offense out of predictable passing situations. That's where success starts. And lastly, this is in Brian Gutekunst's DNA. 3 of the last 4 draft classes, he's drafted at least 3 offensive linemen, again, in 3 of the last 4 draft classes. So him using multiple picks on this position group, not unheard of. In fact, we should almost anticipate it, especially this offseason. Again, given the outlook of free agents that are coming down the pipeline at this position group. So there you have it, my friends. I appreciate you tuning in. Last thing before we go, as we continue to dive deeper into this draft process, there was something Brian Gutekunst said at the NFL Combine that really stuck out to me. We know, like, along the offensive line, right? The Packers covet, they highly value versatility. But that versatility is not just an offensive line trait that they look for, not just a safety trait that they look for. That is emphasized throughout the roster. Brian Gutekunst said, and again, I have an article version of this over at ESPNlacrosse.com, versatility takes priority over scheme for the Packers when they're evaluating players. They want players to have the ability to be able to wear a variety of hats, handle a variety of roles. So as we're going through this process, as we're diving into prospects, keep that in mind. Are there receivers who play both slot and out wide? Do they attack the field at all levels? Is there cornerbacks who are comfortable in both man and zone coverages? Do you have defensive linemen who line up across multiple gaps, who can hold their own in the run game and still get after the quarterback? Those are all traits that are extremely valuable and go above the scheme fit that in terms of what the Packers are looking for in that regard. So just keep that bit of information in mind. So again, I appreciate you tuning in. Hit like on the video, hit subscribe on the YouTube channel. Follow me on Twitter at Paul_Brettel. Find all my work over at ESPNlacrosse.com and download the 105.5 ESPN Lacrosse app. Till next time, friends, take care.